Okay, I want to make an unbiased video. So far I've talked about setup, I've talked about some of the positive, a few of the negatives, but let's go into things that I was concerned about. There's another guy on YouTube making similar videos. I think he received his paramotor before me because his first video about this model was made about 2 days before I received mine. So check out his channel. It's called Avery Flies. He's got some pretty cool stuff on there. And between me and him, we can kind of give you a good overview of what we think about this paramotor. So Avery had a concern about one of his brackets that was down here at the bottom. Mine's not connected to anything vital. I would have to go back and watch his video again. He was talking about how this was a bracket that could be pressed, and if you've got the harness in a certain position, it could release something. Mine doesn't have anything that would be of huge importance. So mine does have a connection up here that's secure, and I'm not concerned about it coming undone, but he may have a different harness, a different setup, but that's definitely something that mine's not connected into anything of any importance when it comes to actual keeping somebody in the harness. So he was concerned about the carabiners that came with it. I've used this style before on my mini plane. I don't necessarily like it as much, but I'm not concerned about the brand. I know it's rated at 18 kilonewtons. We'll see. I have other carabiners I could put on it. He did mention that his paramotor did not come with the bolts for the J-bars where the harness hooks in. Mine did, so maybe that's something they corrected. Another thing that we share is the wiring. So we weren't too happy with the wiring, and so I redid a lot of this to make sure it can't be pulled into that gear and accidentally get chewed up either starting or when I'm flying. I don't think the starter is engaged all the time, but there is the chance that some wiring could get pulled into this gear, and that could cause some issues. You'll notice I have some Loctite here. It's not really needed on these bolts in the back because I've got it on the bolts in the front near the face of the engine. But I did that so if it does break loose, that might be an indication that I need to check the front. I'll probably catch it, spend more time on the other side of the engine, but just in case I'm back here doing something, if I notice that has shifted, that'll give me an indication to go in and check the bolts. And that was another thing he was concerned about. On his first video, he talked about the paint, and I've had the same issues. As soon as I pulled it out of the box, it had some issues with the paint. So I had some similar issues with paint that he did. And it's just, I think, just cheap paint. I don't think it was like thrown around or scuffed up before it was sent. I think this may either happen in shipping and due to the poor paint quality, it's come off. But I'm not concerned about that because I'll probably repaint it anyway later on if I like it. One thing that I've had come up is the netting. So the netting has these little brackets where they've been pressed together, kind of crimped together. And that crimping system's not great because that works great for cable, but it doesn't necessarily work great for rope. So what I did is I didn't really need these other two, so I took the extra line there and put a bunch of half hitches so I could get the tension to work, and then put a fisherman's knot here just to tie off anything, so that I didn't want to cut that. Now I could, I'll probably burn that with a lighter so it doesn't fray anymore, but the reason I didn't want to cut that off is I want to use this netting as long as I can, and so I'll be able to retension that and have extra line, and I'm not worried about that getting tangled up or coming untied based on the types of knots that I used. One other thing that may come up when you're using this is when you try to prime it, and I'll mention this on the break-in video, when you try to prime it, there is a kind of a valve up in here, like a reed valve, and if you can't press gas up into the engine, like you press it and then you're getting resistance, you're gonna have to put a small screwdriver in there and just kind of press that to open it up to allow the gas to flow in to the carburetor. So you want to press that, if I can get to it, little button right there. So you need a small screwdriver. Phillips head would work, don't press too hard. And another concern I had is my air filter was squished when I received it. Not a big deal, right? I mean, that's something easy to fix. But I do want to tie this air filter down to the frame somehow. So probably what I'm gonna do is loosen that, put a piece of line in, and tie that on somehow so that if the air filter comes off, it doesn't go into the prop. I had and used a tie down, and I ran it through the hose clamp for the air filter. So now that's secure. And so another concern when I was getting ready to break this in is I didn't have any locking nuts, any extra ones. I had some on my AirJet Maverick, but not on this. They didn't send any washers with this. And so the bolts were slightly too long without the washers. Once I put the washers in place with the locking washer, everything worked fine. So that's something to watch out for. Also make sure that the on the prop that the wording is facing away from you, because you want this to push. So I had to turn around. And the reason they have the name over here on this side of the prop is because this is supposed to be for RC airplanes, and so it's to pull the airplane, but we need a pusher for paramotors, so you have to flip the prop around. Another concern I'm really having is keeping these spark plug covers on. You really have to press hard, and sometimes with the vibration they pop off. So I'm going to come up with a system to lock these down. You notice that I put a lot of the orange gel on there, that Loctite, it's like a thread locker. I did that on all of the bolts, and Avery mentioned this in his video, that some of his main bolts were not lock nuts. Like the 4 bolts that hold the engine on were not lock nuts, so you definitely want lock nuts. I put some extra Loctite inside, as well as that Loctite I just showed you on the outside. So that's the one that I put on the outside. That's what AirJet puts on their Maverick, on the Vitarazi 180. Actually, Vitarazi probably puts that on there. Here's some other Loctite that I use on the threads. They have different strength of Loctite, so you want to make sure to get the one that you need. But you can see on all the bolts and screws, I actually need to put some up here too. But I'm going to wait until I put that tether for the air filter. So you want the tether for the air filter to keep it from coming off and going into the prop. Also, I had to cut the throttle cable. For some reason, I had this big, long throttle cable extension, and then I put a little Loctite on the end so that it doesn't get frayed. Some of these concerns you're not going to find with most of your well-known brands on a paramotor. They would have already addressed these issues. But coming out of China, off AliExpress, you know, you're going to get what you pay for. And if you've never flown a paramotor or any kind of aircraft, you may not know to look out for these things. So that's the purpose behind these videos, is just to give you some extra ideas on what to look at when you pre-flight this thing before you fly it. Another thing, a key concern is when you use the starter on this, don't just keep it all the way down all of the time. So give it little breaks. If it doesn't start up right away, wait a couple seconds before you try to crank it again, and don't do long bursts of cranking. Your choke is right here, so the choke would be in the up position to choke it, and then once it's warmed up, you can go ahead and turn the choke off. But that's another thing I would like to change, is adjust that so that I can turn the choke on and off without having to take the harness off. Oops, I ran into my Loctite. I'll have to redo that. And then you got the throttle cable right there. But overall, I mean, for the price that you pay for one of these things, it's not a bad paramotor. You're just gonna have to do a little bit more pre-flight than you would for a normal brand.